Hello, in this movie I'm going to overview how to use a gradient mesh in Illustrator. Gradient meshes aren't covered in the current book for some reason, so I think it's helpful to know how they work. I'm going to start by just drawing out a plain old rectangle. And there's two tools we can use to build a gradient mesh. We can actually use the gradient mesh tool, which I'll use in a couple of minutes, but we can also use this command under Object, Create Gradient Mesh. And if I preview this, you'll notice that you get kind of this lattice grid appearing across the rectangle. Right now the appearance is set to flat, and since it's filled with white, we're not going to see much difference here anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it flat, and we'll fill it in as we go. Of course, you can add rows and columns to this, but we'll just start with the basics. Alright, so big deal. What can you do with a gradient mesh? Well, the first thing to understand is every point in here has a color associated with it. So you don't really apply gradients to a gradient mesh. That's one common issue that comes up sometimes with students trying to learn how to use a gradient mesh, is you're trying to apply a gradient and it doesn't seem like it works. So what I'm going to do is just come in, I'm going to click away so nothing's selected, and then since I have Smart Guides on, as I hover over the shape it shows up. I'm going to just come in with my white arrow now, so I'm just going to select just parts of the object. I'm just going to click on one of these points, and notice that it's filled white. If I just choose a color from the color picker, from the color panel, it turns that area green, and then it radiates out and basically mixes with the other white colors on all of the other anchor points that are nearby. Notice that it has components to it that are very similar to what you see inside of a normal shape. There's Bezier handles. I can click and drag these guys around, and as I do, it changes how the gradient mixes. So that's the first thing to kind of be aware of. So you can go through and you can select individual points and color them. You can select a range of points just by dragging a marquee across and picking a color. You can also click in an area in the middle between 4 points. Notice it selects all 4 of the points around, and if I pick a color here, it fills that whole spot with that color, and then from those points out it mixes into the different colors that are nearby. So gradient meshes are basically just great big lattices of gradients, and you're just picking individual colors and it's mixing those together. So you can create very watercolory looking designs by doing this. If you need it to fade into the background, just pick a color for the background, and in fact it's already doing it here. You can see around the edges my background is white and this is filled white, so around the edges it creates this nice soft blur. And again, you can pick these things up and move them around. If I grab one of these mesh shapes off the side, notice the rectangle itself has been converted into these points. I think one thing that's important to understand is that once an item's converted to a mesh, it ceases to be functional in other ways as an item. So if you have this object and you're really attached to it and you want to start experimenting with gradient meshes, I would recommend copying and pasting that object and then performing the operation on the copy, just in case you decide down the road it's not for you, that you want to do something else. But anyway, that's kind of the basics of filling it in. Let's look at the tool. If I come over and grab the mesh tool and I start to hover over this shape, notice that I can add mesh points. So if I come in, if I click in the middle of a patch, they call these mesh patches. If I click in the middle, it's adding one row and one column and bringing in points. Now I can click along that shape, that line. Notice that now it just adds an intersection to it. So I can add extra detail just by clicking along a line if I want, or I can add, just subdivide larger sections by clicking in the middle of things. If I hover over an existing point and click, notice that it just selects it. It doesn't really get rid of it. And I can basically click and grab these handles similar to how you can with the direct selection arrow. So the mesh tool allows you to do both things. If I hover over a point with my Option key held down, notice that I get a minus on my cursor, and I can click and it removes those points. Now, not only did it remove the point, it removed the intersection. So notice that it was everything, the horizontal line and the vertical line that were associated with this point disappear. So that's the mesh tool. Now, in terms of functionality, boy, if you look at something like the Photoshop Wow book, sometimes you'll see artists doing just amazing things with gradient meshes, and it's definitely worthwhile. You get a great contour. I've seen people build faces before with a gradient mesh. You can do lots of fun things with it, but be advised that it is a little tricky to work with. For instance, instead of working with this rectangle, let's start with a shape that's like something more complex. I'm going to pop under the rectangle. I'll choose a star. If I drag out the star and go under Object to Gradient Mesh, notice that even though it's symmetrical, it divides the shape up in kind of an odd way. Instead of getting just lines straight across, now they kind of run up and come back down. And we also get this kind of strange pinching that's happening. So sometimes dealing with such a shape is really hard, especially if you want to color it and not have it look mechanical. Actually getting those points selected and applying colors to them, you might not get what you're looking for. So what I want to encourage you to do is think of clipping masks. Clipping masks are great solutions to working with gradient meshes. So what I'm going to do is just drag out another star here, put it in front of this gradient mesh. Clipping mask always comes in front of whatever it's going to clip. With my black arrow, I'm going to select both the star and the gradient mesh. I'm going to just choose Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And when I do that, I get all the neat properties of the gradient mesh, but inside of this clipped item. So I no longer, whoops, I accidentally grabbed the side. I no longer have to worry about dealing with the color of the item and the geometry of the item at the same time. I can affect those independently, and that might be helpful for you. There might be times when you want the contour of the object, and times when you don't. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that I found that to be a good interim solution when you're working with gradient meshes. Instead of trying to build these complex shapes and then fill them with all these gradients, I just like building the shape separately and then using the mesh as a separate object. So anyway, that's it in terms of gradient meshes. Please let me know if you have questions. Thanks.